Welcome to the Christian Atheist, Episode 12, Responding to the Critic, Part 1. I ended last week's Christian Atheist with a plea to trust God's truth, not to fear the doubts and the doubters. If God is truth, then we have nothing to fear in seeking truth honestly. Perhaps I should not say do not be afraid, as this sort of courage is acquired, not inherent. I still get a knot in my gut when faced with tough criticism and feel out of my comfort zone. Instead, I should say, do not retreat because you feel afraid. I never know how this confidence plays out in advance of any critical dialogue with someone. Usually, for me, it involves taking the claims of others seriously enough to acknowledge what I don't know, which opens the possibility that I might learn something. It also keeps me on my toes in two ways. First, we are called to be wise as serpents. Not all attacks are honest or rational. Many are designed to hurt and sidetrack the discussion rather than to search for truth. But second, we are called to be gentle as doves, since no matter what the intent of the arguer, they are still human beings for whom Christ died and who possess God's spark. I thought it might be useful this week and next to offer my pattern of response to one of my own critics, maxdoubt, who responded to my Christian Atheist number 9 on Jordan Peterson. I hope in this way to display how a careful, honest, and measured response can blunt the vitriol and keep the conversation going at a rational level. The first thing to note is that Max is a fairly reasonable critic within the mainstream of opinion on academic biblical scholarship. He ends on a quite reasonable note. He says, "The Bible is a priceless book as a window into the minds of ancient people, primitive and superstitious though they were. And there is history in the Bible. It's just found mostly between the lines. But to call the Bible boundless in insight and wisdom is to ignore its horrors and to ignore the advances in authentic, unbiased biblical studies." Note here that while Max is a serious critic of the Bible, he is not discounting its value as a historical document from which knowledge can be gleaned. Max is not a vitriolic hater, but someone with whom you can converse intelligently. His take on the Bible as superstitious and primitive is not uncommon, though I believe it to be substantially wrong. We will look together at how I think it best to respond to Max's criticism. Not to his credit, Max begins by casting slurs, which is never good argument, however rhetorically effective it can be. The first real position he states is 6 sentences in, quote, "To describe the Bible as such," what I said, a book boundless in insight and wisdom, "is just cherry picking." One commits the informal fallacy of cherry picking when you look at evidence that supports your side of the argument without taking into account other evidence that might support a differing view. It is Max who commits this fallacy most clearly in what follows, by picking some seriously problematic Bible texts as evidence of its, quote, primitive and superstitious nature. His argument, essentially, is this. Premise 1. The Bible presents a cure for leprosy that involves incantations and the blood of a bird. Premise 2. The Bible presents a paternity test that clearly is superstitious, and then he gives details of its superstitious nature. Premise 3. This sort of superstitious ickiness infests the whole Bible. Conclusion. The Bible cannot justifiably be called a book boundless in insight and wisdom. This is an inductive argument meant to assert the probability of its conclusion as strongly as possible. Its logic is that of support for a conclusion, not that of deductive necessity, which is just an observation, not a critique of the argument. Almost all of our arguments as human beings are inductive in nature. Certainly, almost all scientific arguments are inductive in nature. However, an inductive argument is only as strong as 1. The individual premises, truth states, and 2. The logic of their support for the conclusion. Max's argument, though containing at least one really good critical assessment of the Bible, premise 2, fails to be a good argument in all other ways. Let's examine it. Premise 1 presents a reading of Leviticus 14. The context makes it clear that what is being presented is not meant to be a cure for leprosy at all, but rather a cleansing rite to restore the Jewish person to fellowship with God and His people after their leprosy has departed. These cleansing rites are arcane, odd, and distasteful to many, me among them, as the Christian Atheist episode 4 makes clear. But the claim that this is superstitious, in opposition to cultural, is not well supported. The second premise is far more serious, I think, and reflects my own reservations with the Old Testament sacrificial system. If you read Numbers 5:11 through 31, Max's characterization of the procedure is not far off. So we have to give him credit that he is not misrepresenting the Bible's actual words to make a point. This is a very positive thing, and very much to Max's credit. We should, at the very least, be able to agree over clear-cut data. I even have to agree that this appears to be superstitious nonsense, though our own ignorance of the times and the text itself may weaken this claim. We should be careful to not arrogantly overstate our understanding of things like this. The third premise, 2, suffers from the frequent arrogance of the critic, overstatement. Max has some serious objections that should not be quickly dismissed or glossed over. I don't have answers that I am happy with for the quote, superstitious ickiness that sometimes appears in the Bible. But they are remarkable not for their pervasiveness, but for their scarcity, especially given the wide-ranging and remarkable scope of this book. I myself could add many troubling issues to this list, the one that Max provides. But the fact that the Bible has a number of unresolved issues that I cannot understand does not generalize into the claim that, quote, superstitious ickiness infests the whole Bible. This claim is patently false. And a fair-minded critic should not make such claims, just as the Christian should not simply dismiss the serious objections of the critic. I applaud the many serious attempts by believers to make sense of the Bible's problematic passages. But even so, we should understand that the need to explain issues means that there are serious issues. Explanations are not always resolutions. My return to Christ depended upon accepting the tension of irresolution, of uncertainty, of paradox. Why? Because that's how the world actually presents itself to us. Remember, no matter how hard I tried to box my world up into neat little packages, it kept escaping those boundaries. Eventually, God led me to accept uncertainty, which again opened the door to faith. As I have said before, I cannot pretend to understand God or His ways, nor will I box Him into the narrow confines of a doctrinal biblical inspiration. I don't know how biblical inspiration works, but I accept the unique status of the Bible as God's word to man. This is, admittedly, a faith position for me. I have my doubts, too, and I refuse to simply explain them away. But the Bible has spoken to God's people for millennia now, and its messages and insights are as fresh and relevant today as when they were written. Men wrote the Bible in human languages, an inherently ambiguous and imperfect medium. and God inspired it, breathed into it. What does that mean? This is another of those paradoxes that human reason confronts, but cannot fathom. The Bible, in analogy with the Incarnation, is both human and divine in origin. If we privilege the divine character above all else, we get the evangelical notion of an infallible book. But we run the risk of losing the human authorship and of fetishizing a document rather than God's message through it. I don't know who is right and who is wrong in these debates. I am too ignorant. My concern is Christ, the living Word, and His message and work of salvation for mankind. Returning to Max's argument, we can now see that there is little to no support for his conclusion from his premises. The first premise is simply a misunderstanding of the text. The second premise presents one issue of superstitious ickiness. And the third premise generalizes from this that the whole Bible is full of such, which is patently untrue. So, as regards the truth states of his premises, Max does not fare well. But for the sake of argument, let us suppose that all three of his premises are true. Even so, they do not adequately support his conclusion, as a book may contain all sorts of errors and superstitions and still have boundless insight and wisdom. The Analects of Confucius has errors, scientific and otherwise, and the works of Plato and Aristotle have numerous errors and even arguably superstitions. But there is a great deal of wisdom and insight in both. If the presence of error and superstition is to destroy any value for human understanding, then we will have to purge most of humanity's literature from our libraries in terms of practical value. Max himself concedes as much in the final words of his critique, the first of those I quoted above. To be fair to Max, he was not seeking to present a fully formed argument, I think, but simply to scattergun a few points that would add up to sufficient reason to undermine my position. This, too, is typical of the critic. And to a certain degree, I misrepresent his position by formalizing it into a structured argument. Still, the formalized structure of an argument is the easiest way to evaluate the reasoning of a set of claims. Max should be given the courtesy of correcting his evaluation. My evaluation, and I gladly offer that to him. His overstatement of his position is his biggest downfall. It would be a reasonable critique to claim that there are passages in the Bible that argue against its being taken seriously as a God-given text, as God is the author of truth, and the procedure for determining paternity, for example, is seriously problematic from a modern medical perspective. Next episode, I would like to conclude this two-part response to the critic by addressing Max's claim that the Bible is pseudo-historical. He makes some great points here as well that deserve our honest attention. If any of you want to read the actual text of Max's critique and my response, it can be found in the comments to the Christian Atheist, episode 9, on Jordan Peterson's contributions to the machinery of the looking glass. I look forward to seeing you all next week. If this is the first episode of the Christian Atheist you've watched, please subscribe below to be sure not to miss any upcoming episodes and to view those you've missed from our YouTube channel. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.